Where We're From highlights the rich textures, histories, and experiences of the Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American community. Each episode is produced by students at San Jose State University.
Hello, welcome to the Jays, Crows, and Woodpeckers, where we peck at events throughout history and forgotten narratives that shape our world. Today we're soaring through one of the darker threads of American history in our three-part series, Asian Hate Throughout Time. From exclusion laws and violence in the 1800s to the xenophobia today. In this episode, we explore the Rock Spring Massacre. I'm one of your Jays, Jody. I'm with the other Jays, Jazz and James, our Crow, Claudia, and our Woodpecker, William.
Thank you, Jody. On the topic of Asian hate, there are some well-known examples of Asian hate here in America. Events like the murder of Vincent Chin, the rooftop Koreans, and more recently, how Chinese people were treated during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's one event in history that I would like to discuss today that has remained relatively obscure. That event, of course, is the Rock Springs Massacre.
This event is relatively unknown.
Yeah, I remember learning about it in middle school, but I don't remember much. Do you guys mind reminding me on what exactly happened that led up to that massacre?
Of course. Let's start from the very beginning, shall we? So, back in the 1860s to 1870s, around a decade before the massacre, Chinese immigration to the US was skyrocketing, especially at the height of the gold rush.
Yeah, many immigrants sought work in the American West, finding the opportunities there very appealing.
Oh, like what kind of work did they look for?
Any kind of work, really. Mining and working on the railroad was a surefire way to get a job. But as the number of arriving Chinese laborers rose, tensions with the white community rose at just the same rate.
Many of them went to Wyoming to work on the Transcontinental Railroad. Union Pacific Railroad ran coal mines in Rock Springs. They took advantage of this influx of Chinese laborers.
They saw them as an alternative to white workers. And as you can guess, this made their resentment towards the incoming Chinese workers even greater than it already was.
Yeah, resentment toward the Chinese was also increasing, which led to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep, you're remembering it correctly. And even with this exclusion act, there was still so many Chinese laborers, and they seem like they're coming in droves.
So they were like the majority?
Yeah, by the 1880s, they made up a large portion of the workers in the mines, mostly in Rock Springs. And this is what brings us to the major point of contention between Chinese immigrant miners and the local white miners.
Ooh, do tell me more, please.
Chinese workers often worked for lower wages, which upset the white miners. They felt that even with the Exclusion Act, there were still so many Chinese laborers coming in.
They felt that the Chinese were cheating the system. Now imagine how angry the white miners got when they realized that the companies favored the Chinese workers over them.
Of course they did. Companies tend to like spending less money.
Yeah, these labor practices were exacerbating an already big divide between racial groups. So when the white miners formed labor unions,
They excluded the Chinese workers. I think I remember it more now.
The exclusion wasn't bad enough. A big rise in strikes and anti-Chinese propaganda nationwide continued.
What was shown in the propaganda? Were they saying about Chinese people in general?
The Chinese were depicted as threats to their jobs and to the social order.
the media and politics were blaming Chinese workers for the declining wages at the time and the difficult labor conditions.
Because of that, anti-Chinese sentiment peaked. Violent incidents started taking place nationwide. Incidents from cities and states in those states like Washington, California, Colorado, and Oregon. were foreshadowing the violence that was about to happen in Rock Springs.
Which then brings us to the event itself.
So now we're talking about the massacre itself. Tell me, how did it start?
Okay. I will tell you, it started with a physical altercation between a white and a Chinese miner. From what we know, it was about job assignments at the Union Pacific mines.
It really boiled over when all the white miners walked out of their jobs.
So I'm assuming that those miners weren't just gonna go on a strike again, huh?
Yep, the white miners who walked out didn't just walk out. They formed a heavily armed mob, about 100 strong. They all headed to Chinatown.
Their attacks and set homes on fire. Set homes and businesses on fire, destroying the town. White miners were burning and looting properties and took the money they felt they were owed.
You made me remember about it. I remember that 28 Chinese miners were killed.
Yeah, and about 15 Chinese miners were wounded while survivors flee from the attack. The violence was severe and lasted hours. With the town destroyed, there would be no place to return to, even if you survived the attack. Despite the violence, there was still little to no intervention from the local authorities.
Talking about the effects, let's talk about the aftermath of the massacre. What happened after everything settled down?
Yeah. Okay, here. Check it
Uh,
out. I wrote down the massacre's aftermath. As you can see here, disturbingly, some accounts suggest that the local authorities actually supported the massacre. It explains why there was such a lack of response on their part.
I see here that the federal troops were sent to protect the Chinese miners, but why didn't they send them sooner?
I wager to guess and say that the local authorities had something to do with why the federal government had such a late response. That's just my guess.
No, it kind of makes sense. By the time the federal troops got to Rock Springs, it was too late. Everything was destroyed. What's worse was that no one was ever even convicted.
Yep. And because the white residents refused to identify who took part in the massacre, most of the mob went unpunished. Even the 16 white miners that were arrested were released on bail.
So that's why China demanded reparations?
Hey, you know your stuff. That's right, they did. The massacre as a whole caused a rise in diplomatic tensions between America and China.
I mean, along with the massacre being a turning point in exclusionary policies towards Chinese immigrants.
Wait, but what about the long-term consequences? Is there even any?
Yes, there was. After the massacre, surviving Chinese workers were herded into boxcars by U.S. soldiers. And they were told that they were going to go to San Francisco.
Yeah, but they didn't do that. They were dropped back down in Rock Springs and were instructed to go back to work on their mines.
Even after the violence, the Union Pacific Railroad continued to use the Chinese laborers.
Oh, okay. I remember it now. So I guess basically the massacre contributes to a broader narrative of the racial violence and exclusion, leading to stricter immigration laws against Asian American immigrants in the US.
Asian hate can be seen throughout history and is all around the US. The Rock Springs Massacre isn't the only event where Asian hate can be seen. During the next episode, we will talk about another event, a more recent one. In the meantime, though, I want you to ask yourself, how did media portrayals and public opinion at the time shape the national narrative around the Rock Springs Massacre and its victims? In what ways does the legacy of the Rock Springs Massacre still influence discussions of race and labor in the US today? And lastly, how do memorials, or the lack thereof, for events like the Rock Springs Massacre contribute to the ways history is remembered or forgotten in American society? With that said, it's time to fly the coop. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Where We're From. This podcast is produced by students enrolled in Dr. Joanne Rondila's Asian American Studies courses at San Jose State University.